Have you ever walked into a space so grand, so awe-inspiring, that it felt like stepping into another world? Picture this: the moment you enter a Gothic cathedral, your gaze is pulled upward, past soaring arches and intricate carvings, toward a ceiling that seems to dissolve into light. These aren't just buildings, they're living stories carved in stone, glowing with color, and humming with centuries of hidden meaning. Every curve, every figure, every beam of light filtering through stained glass was placed with intention, whispering messages to those who know how to listen. Today, we're going to become those listeners, unraveling the secrets of Gothic cathedrals, one symbol at a time. Think about the last time you stood in front of something truly monumental. That feeling, the catch in your breath, the sense of being small yet strangely connected to something far greater, is exactly what medieval architects wanted to evoke. These cathedrals weren't just feats of engineering, they were carefully crafted sermons in stone, designed to teach, inspire, and even humble those who entered. From the gargoyles perched high above to the delicate tracery of rose windows, nothing was arbitrary. Every detail held a deeper purpose, whether pointing heavenward in prayer or grounding the divine in the everyday lives of those who worshipped there. So why does this matter now, centuries later? Because these structures are more than relics of the past, they're time capsules of human ambition, faith, and creativity. They challenge us to look beyond the surface, to see the layers of meaning in the world around us. And that's exactly what we'll do together. Over the next few minutes, we'll decode the hidden language of Gothic architecture, uncovering how medieval builders used light, shape, and symbolism to create spaces that still move us today. Whether you've marveled at Notre Dame's spire or traced the veins of a stained glass saint, this journey will change how you see these masterpieces forever. Ready to begin? Let's step inside. To understand how Gothic cathedrals became these breathtaking vessels of light and meaning, we need to rewind to 12th century France, a time when churches were dark, heavy fortresses of faith. Romanesque architecture, with its thick walls and small windows, reflected a world still gripped by uncertainty. But then came a visionary monk named Abbott-Suga, who looked at his modest abbey church of St. Denis and imagined something revolutionary. He believed architecture should do more than shelter worshippers. It should dissolve the boundary between earth and heaven. His radical idea that light itself was divine, and if a building could harness it, the sacred would feel within reach. What followed was nothing short of an architectural miracle. Suga's team broke free from the limitations of the past by inventing or refining three key elements: the pointed arch, which could carry weight higher and more gracefully than rounded Romanesque ones; the ribbed vault, distributing pressure so walls could grow taller without collapsing; and the flying buttress, those elegant stone arms bracing the structure from the outside, like invisible hands holding up the sky. Together, these innovations turned stone into lace, allowing walls to be replaced with vast stained glass windows. Suddenly, sunlight wasn't just entering the church, it was transforming, fractured into rubies, sapphires, and gold as it poured through biblical scenes. But this wasn't just about engineering prowess. Every choice whispered a theological truth. The verticality of Gothic cathedrals, those spires stabbing the clouds, was a deliberate metaphor for humanity's reach toward God. Even the floor plans, shaped like a cross, turned the building itself into a sacred diagram. And in an age where most people couldn't read, these structures became books in stone, their sculptures and glass panels teaching stories of saints and salvation. The Gothic style spread like wildfire across Europe because it spoke to a profound shift in medieval spirituality. No longer was God distant and fearsome, but luminous, intimate, and woven into the very air people breathe. What's astonishing is how these ideas crystallized so quickly. Within decades, St. Denis's experiments inspired charters, rhymes, and Notre Dame, each one refining Suga's vision into ever grander hymns of stone and light. And though the abbot never lived to see his ideas reach their full glory, his legacy endures every time someone steps into a Gothic cathedral, gazes upward, and feels, just for a moment, weightless. Standing in the nave of Chartres Cathedral, your neck cranes almost painfully as you try to take in the vaulted ceiling 120 feet above, higher than many modern 10-story buildings. This wasn't just architectural ambition, it was spiritual gravity. Gothic builders didn't just want you to look up, they wanted you to feel upward, as if the stones themselves were lifting your soul toward the divine. Every element conspired to create this sensation. Slender columns elongating like stretched fingers, ribs on the vaults converging like pathways to the sky, even the way light filtered down from clerestory windows, making the ceiling appear to float. Compare this to Cologne Cathedral, where the nave soars to 156 feet, a height so staggering that when construction began in 1248, it pushed engineering to its limits. Workers risked their lives to erect scaffolding that high, all for a single purpose: to make worshippers feel simultaneously awestruck and insignificant. In a world where most people lived in cramped, dim homes, these spaces were visceral reminders of humanity's smallness and God's grandeur. The higher the vaults, the clearer the message: earthly life was fleeting, but heaven was eternal. This obsession with height wasn't just about piety, it mirrored the rigid hierarchy of medieval society. Just as kings and bishops sat above peasants, the cathedral's architecture reinforced a cosmic order. The west facade, often studded with statues of saints and kings, acted as a celestial ladder, figures climbing toward the rose window, where Christ presided as the ultimate authority. Even the building process reflected this. Master masons worked high above the crowds, literally and metaphorically closer to God, while laborers toiled below. Yet there's a beautiful contradiction here. While the vertical lines emphasized hierarchy, they also offered something democratic. No matter your station, when you stepped inside, you shared the same humbling experience. A beggar and a baron both had to tilt their heads back, both felt their breath catch at those dizzying heights. In that shared moment of awe, the cathedral became a great equalizer, proof that transcendence was within reach, if only you dared to look up. Next time you see a Gothic spire piercing the clouds, remember, it's not just stone reaching for the sky, it's an invitation. If the architects of Gothic cathedrals built upward to lift the soul, they crafted windows to illuminate it. Nowhere is this more breathtaking than Paris's Sainte-Chapelle, a jewel box where stone seems to vanish entirely, leaving walls that are sheer stained glass, glowing like suspended gemstones. Step inside on a sunny morning and the effect is overwhelming. Sunlight doesn't just enter the space, it becomes the space, drenching every surface in liquid sapphire, emerald, and gold. This wasn't mere artistry, it was alchemy. Medieval theologians believed light was the closest earthly approximation of God's radiance, and these windows were designed to make the divine palpable. Consider the logistics. Sainte-Chapelle's upper chapel boasts 15 towering windows, each nearly 50 feet high, containing over 1,100 individual panels of glass. Together, they form a shimmering tapestry of biblical history from Genesis to Revelation. For worshippers in the 13th century, most of whom couldn't read, these weren't decorations. They were a radiant scripture where sunlight transformed into stories. A single beam might highlight Noah's Ark in vibrant greens, then dance across to Moses parting a crimson sea, all without a single written word. The glass became a preacher, using color and light to teach morality, history, and hope. But the magic goes deeper than storytelling. Every hue carried symbolic weight, carefully chosen to convey spiritual truths. Cobalt blue, made from precious lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, represented divine wisdom, and the heavens notice how it often cloaks figures of Christ and the Virgin Mary. Ruby red, infused with gold particles, evoked both martyrs' blood and God's love, while emerald greens mirrored earthly paradise. Even the placement mattered. Windows facing east caught the morning sun, bathing scenes of resurrection in dawn's golden light, while northern panels, cooler and dimmer, often depicted Old Testament prophecies waiting to be fulfilled. The true genius lies in how these colors interacted. On overcast days, the glass might hum with muted blues and purples, creating a somber, contemplative mood. But when sunlight flooded in, the chapel erupted reds and yellows, dancing across stone floors like celestial fire. This wasn't random beauty, it mirrored medieval cosmology, where light was believed to carry divine energy. Philosophers like Abbott-Suga wrote ecstatically about how stained glass didn't just transmit light but transmuted it, transforming earthly sunlight into a metaphor for God's grace. What's often overlooked is the fragility behind this splendor. Stained glass is by nature ephemeral, its colors shifting with the hour, fading over centuries. In that sense, it's the perfect medium for Gothic spirituality, a reminder that divine light is both present and fleeting, something to be marveled at before it changes again. Modern visitors to St. Chapelle still gasp when sunlight hits those windows, proving that 800 years haven't dimmed the power of this radiant theology. The stones may point to heaven, but it's the light that makes you believe you might actually reach it. Walk the length of Amiens Cathedral, and you'll trace the shape of a cross with your very footsteps, a design so deliberate it feels like walking through a prayer. This cruciform floor plan wasn't just practical, it was theological architecture in its purest form. Every curve and corner whispered the same truth. This building was an earthly mirror of divine order. From the soaring nave representing Christ's body to the transept stretching like outstretched arms, these cathedrals turned stone into sacred geometry, inviting worshippers to step inside the symbolism of their faith. But the precision goes far deeper than simple shapes. Medieval architects obsessed over ratios, believing mathematical harmony reflected God's perfection. Take Rheims Cathedral's choir. Its dimensions follow the golden ratio, approximately 1.618 to 1, a proportion found in everything from seashells to galaxies. To the medieval mind, this wasn't coincidence. It was proof that human creativity could echo cosmic patterns. Even the Fibonacci sequence, where each number is the sum of the two before it, appears in the spirals of rose windows, their petals unfurling like a divine fingerprint. These weren't aesthetic choices, they were acts of devotion, attempts to encode heaven's logic into mortar and glass. Consider how sunlight plays into this sacred calculus. Many altars align precisely with the rising sun on the feast day of the cathedral's patron saint, flooding the holiest space with dawn's golden light. At Chartres, the summer solstice sun strikes a specific flagstone near the labyrinth, turning an ordinary stone into a celestial clock. These alignments transformed buildings into instruments, measuring not just time but eternity. For medieval worshippers, this wasn't mere symbolism, it was a physical reminder that heaven and earth moved to the same rhythm. What's often overlooked is how these designs served dual purposes. While the floor plan guided spiritual contemplation, it also orchestrated movement. Pilgrims would flow down the nave like a river, pausing at the crossing the heart of the cross before circling the ambulatory to venerate relics. Every path was choreographed, turning architecture into liturgy. Even the labyrinth embedded in Charter's floor, once walked on hands and knees, mirrored the winding journey of faith itself. Perhaps most astonishing is how these principles scaled. From modest parish churches to towering cathedrals, the same sacred geometry repeated, creating a visual language anyone could understand. A peasant might not grasp Latin hymns, but they could read the cross beneath their feet or feel the rightness of a space where every column, every arch, resonated with invisible harmony. In a world where few could own books, these buildings became living scriptures, not just telling stories, but embodying them. So the next time you see a cathedral's floor plan, don't just see lines. See a medieval mind map of the universe, where mathematics met mysticism, and every measurement was a silent hymn. Look up at the rooftop of Notre Dame, and you'll lock eyes with stone creatures frozen mid-snarl gargoyles crouching like sentinels at the edge of the sacred. These aren't just architectural quirks, they're medieval paradoxes carved in stone. At first glance, their twisted forms seem out of place on a holy building, all gnashing teeth and bulging eyes. But that's precisely the point. Gargoyles were the gatekeepers of Gothic cathedrals, their grotesque beauty serving a sacred purpose, to remind the faithful that evil lurked just beyond the church's walls, and divinity was the only refuge. Take a closer look at their anatomy, and you'll see genius at work. Those elongated necks and gaping mouths aren't just for show, they're functional rainwater spouts, channeling torrents away from fragile stone walls. When storms hit, these creatures came alive, spewing water from their throats in a spectacle that must have felt like magic to medieval onlookers. The word gargoyle even comes from the French gargouille, meaning throat or gullet. But their practicality hid deeper symbolism. By transforming something as mundane as drainage into a theatrical display, architects turned weather itself into a sermon. Every downpour became a reminder. Just as water was cast out, so too could sin be expelled from the human soul. Yet gargoyles shared their perches with another kind of creature, grotesques. Unlike their water-spouting cousins, these stone figures served no structural purpose. They were pure symbolism, often tucked into corners or lurking above doorways. Some were chimeras, blending lion bodies with bat wings. Others depicted humans mid-scream, their faces contorted in eternal anguish. Historians debate their exact meaning, but one theory resonates: they acted as spiritual scarecrows. Placed at the boundaries between sacred and profane spaces above doorways, along roof lines, they visually repelled evil forces, much like their functional counterparts diverted rainwater. In a world where people believed demons could slip through cracks in reality, these stone guardians offered psychological armor. What's fascinating is how they mirrored medieval minds. The same society that produced luminous stained glass and soaring spires also obsessed over sin's grotesque consequences. Gargoyles embodied this tension, their hybrid forms reflecting fears of moral corruption. A figure with a goat's body and a man's face might warn against lust. A bat-winged demon could symbolize heresy's dangers. Even their placement was strategic. At Notre Dame, they cluster near entrances, as if to scrutinize everyone entering. It's no accident that pilgrims had to pass beneath their gaze, a visceral reminder to leave worldly vices at the door. Modern visitors often assume these creatures were meant to frighten, but medieval worshippers likely saw them differently, not as threats but as allies. In bestiaries of the time, monsters frequently symbolized chaos overcome by divine order. A gargoyle wasn't just a warning, it was proof that evil could be harnessed, even made to serve holiness. That's the ultimate Gothic irony. The very things that seem monstrous are often the most devout. Next time you spot a gargoyle, don't just see a scary face. See a medieval mind at work, one that believed even stone could be a shield against the darkness. At the heart of Chartres Cathedral, suspended like a jeweled spiderweb between heaven and earth, the north rose window explodes with color, a 12-foot-wide kaleidoscope of sapphire, ruby, and gold. To stand beneath it is to stand inside a living mandala, where geometry and divinity fuse into something beyond art. This isn't just decoration, it's medieval cosmology rendered in glass and lead. Every radiating spoke, every petal-like panel, whispers secrets about how 13th-century minds mapped the universe onto sacred architecture. The magic begins with the circle itself, a shape medieval thinkers saw as perfect, infinite, and divine. Unlike the earthly squares and rectangles below, the rose window's unbroken curve mirrored the celestial spheres believed to rotate above the earth. Its 12 lobes don't just frame biblical scenes, they echo the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 months, the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 12 apostles. In one breathtaking design, Chartres' master glaziers tied human history to cosmic order, suggesting that time itself revolved around Christ, depicted at the window's center as the still point of the turning world. Look closer at the tracery, those delicate stone veins dividing the glass. At Chartres, the North Rose's outer ring features 24 smaller circles, each housing a crowned elder from the Book of Revelation. Why 24? Because medieval numerology treated numbers as codes. 24 isn't just double 12. It's the sum of the 12 Old Testament patriarchs and the 12 New Testament apostles, visually uniting both testaments into a single harmonious vision. Even the colors follow this sacred math. The deep cobalt surrounding Christ transitions outward through emerald greens and ruby reds, mirroring the medieval belief that divine light fragmented into varied hues as it descended through heavenly hierarchies. Compare this to the South Rose at Notre Dame de Paris, where the Virgin Mary reigns at the center amidst 16 petals, a number associated with mercy and renewal. Here, the geometry shifts to octagons and squares, subtly referencing the 8 Beatitudes and the 4 cardinal virtues. The difference isn't arbitrary. It reflects how each window served a unique theological purpose. North-facing roses often emphasized judgment and the old law, their cooler blues evoking divine wisdom, while southern ones bathed in warmer light focused on grace and redemption. Perhaps most astonishing is how these windows transformed with the day's light. At noon, Chartres' South Rose might blaze like a fiery wheel, recalling Ezekiel's vision of God's chariot. By dusk, the same window could dim into a meditative violet, its central Madonna seeming to gather the fading light into her mantle. This wasn't passive symbolism, it was interactive theology. For medieval worshippers, the rose window became a living clock of faith, its shifting colors marking not just hours but spiritual seasons, a reminder that divine truths weren't static, but as dynamic as the sunlight passing through them. Modern eyes might see only beauty, but these designs were puzzles meant to be decoded. A peasant unable to read Latin could still understand the rose window's message. Just as all lines radiated from a single center, so too did all creation flow from God. The next time you encounter one of these stone and glass marvels, don't just look, read. Every curve is a sentence, every color a word in the grand story medieval architects dared to tell in light. Beneath the soaring vaults of Chartres Cathedral, hidden in plain sight, lies a path unlike any other, a labyrinth spanning 42 feet across, its 11 concentric circles winding toward the center like a frozen river of stone. To modern eyes, it might resemble an ancient puzzle or decorative motif, but for medieval pilgrims, this was Jerusalem brought to their doorstep. At a time when wars and poverty made the actual Holy Land unreachable for most, walking this labyrinth became a sacred act of substitution. Every deliberate step along its 777-foot path stood in for the miles they'd never travel, turning physical motion into spiritual devotion. What's astonishing is how ingeniously these designs mirrored the theology of pilgrimage. Unlike later hedge mazes designed to confuse and entertain, Gothic labyrinths followed a single, unambiguous route. No dead ends, no tricks. The challenge wasn't navigating choices but surrendering to the journey itself. Worshippers often moved on their knees, tracing the path in quiet meditation, their progress mirroring the soul's slow ascent toward grace. The very act of walking became prayer, each turn representing a lifetime's worth of struggles and revelations condensed into minutes. At the center, instead of frustration, they found a rosette of stone, a symbol of divine arrival where the seeker could pause and glimpse, however briefly, what it meant to reach the celestial Jerusalem. The materials themselves whispered meaning. Shotter's labyrinth isn't carved from ordinary limestone but from the same creamy white stone used for the altar, visually tying the path to the Eucharist. Underfoot, its texture changes subtly, smoother near the center, rougher at the edges, a tactile reminder that spiritual growth wears down resistance over time. Even its dimensions encode sacred numbers, 7 circuits for the days of creation, 12 petals at the center echoing the heavenly city's 12 gates in Revelation. Every detail conspired to turn geometry into theology. Contrast this with Renaissance mazes like the one at Hampton Court Palace, where hedges twist into dead ends purely for amusement. Those later designs celebrated human cleverness, the triumph of reason over chaos. But Gothic labyrinths celebrated surrender. They taught that true wisdom lay not in outsmarting the path but in trusting it, even when it doubled back or seemed to lead away from the center. In an age before clocks regimented daily life, walking the labyrinth imposed its own rhythm, teaching patience as a virtue. Perhaps most moving is how these designs democratized transcendence. While only the wealthy could afford real pilgrimages, anyone, beggar, merchant, or king, could walk the labyrinth for free. The same feet that trod muddy village lanes could now follow a sacred path, their journey as valid as any to the Holy Land. In a world rigidly divided by class, the labyrinth offered rare equality. Everyone entered at the edge, everyone moved at the same pace, and everyone reached the same destination. Today, visitors still pause to trace the path with their eyes or fingertips, proving that 8 centuries haven't dulled its power. Some come seeking solace, others curiosity, but all touch something deeper than stone. The human longing to make the intangible tangible, to turn yearning into footsteps, and to find, in a winding path on a cold floor, a map for the soul's most private journey. Stand before the west portal of Rheims Cathedral, and you'll meet an angel unlike any other, its delicate lips curled into a knowing smile, as if sharing a secret across 8 centuries. This smiling angel isn't just a masterpiece of Gothic sculpture. It's a doorway into a hidden language where every fold of drapery, every tilt of the head, and every object clutched in stone hands was a deliberate syllable in a visual sermon. Medieval sculptors didn't carve statues. They crafted a silent vocabulary of faith, using poses and props to telegraph complex theology to illiterate crowds. A saint holding a key, that's Peter. A figure with a tower, that's Barbara, patroness of architects. Even the way a robe cascaded could signal martyrdom or mercy. Take Strasbourg Cathedral's stern prophets, their faces etched with gravity as they point toward messianic prophecies. Their placement on the facade wasn't random. They stood as a bridge between the Old Testament and the New, their outstretched fingers leading the eye toward scenes of Christ's life above. Meanwhile, at Amiens, the Boudier statue of Christ on the central trumeau doesn't just bless visitors. His right foot rests on a dragon, a subtle declaration that evil is literally beneath him. These weren't artistic flourishes, they were theological footnotes carved for an audience who'd never read a book. But the true genius lies in how these sculptures interacted with their environment. Saints known for protection like Michael the Archangel often flanked doorways, their stone gazes scanning all who entered. Teachers like Augustine or Gregory clustered near altars, their chiseled lips forever mid-lesson. Even erosion tells a story. At St. Peter's in Rome, the Apostle's bronze foot has been worn smooth by millions of touches, a tactile testament to centuries of pilgrims seeking connection. In Chartres, the statue of St. Modest gleams where generations have rubbed her foot for luck, polishing the stone to a warm gold, the symbolism extended to materials themselves. Virgin Mary statues were frequently carved from ivory or alabaster, white symbolizing purity, while martyrs might be rendered in red-veined marble, their stone bleeding under candlelight. At Rheims, the smiling angels' once vibrant polychrome paint, traces of azure blue and gold leaf still cling in crevices, would have made celestial beings seem to glow against the cathedral's sombre stone. This wasn't decoration, it was visual theology, using color and texture to make the divine feel immediate. What's often overlooked is how these sculptures changed with the hours. At noon, the smiling angel's grin might look benevolent. By twilight, shadow could twist it into something more enigmatic. Medieval worshippers understood this duality, that saints weren't just comforters but challengers, their expressions shifting like faith itself, now tender, now severe. Next time you encounter a cathedral statue, don't just see frozen stone. Listen. Every fold, every gesture is speaking if you know how to hear. At Bourges Cathedral, something extraordinary happens every winter solstice. As dawn breaks on the shortest day of the year, a single sunbeam pierces the stained glass like a golden arrow, striking a precise spot on the north aisle floor, a carved rosette hidden among the stones. This isn't accidental poetry, it's celestial engineering. Gothic architects didn't just build toward heaven, they mapped the cosmos in stone, turning their cathedrals into colossal astronomical instruments that marked sacred time with unerring precision. Consider the logistics. Bourges' alignment required staggering accuracy. The windows' mullions had to filter sunlight at exactly the right angle, accounting not just for the solstice sun's low arc but for the cathedral's latitude and elevation. Modern laser measurements reveal the beam's target, a modest floral carving, is offset by mere millimeters from perfection. Such precision suggests master masons collaborated with astronomers, blending faith with empirical observation. The result, a building that didn't just house rituals but became one, its very stones singing in harmony with the seasons. This marriage of astronomy and theology runs deeper than solstice spectacles. Many Gothic cathedrals embed pagan solar symbolism within Christian frameworks. Chartres' Labyrinth, for instance, aligns so the summer solstice sun illuminates its center, a nod to pre-Christian solar cults repurposed to honor Christ as the Sun of Righteousness. Even the zodiac cycles carved into cathedral portals served dual roles. They satisfied church authorities by illustrating God's orderly creation, while secretly preserving folk traditions that tied planting cycles to celestial events. Farmers who couldn't read calendars still knew when to sow wheat by watching how light fell on certain carvings come equinox. The practical genius of these designs often goes overlooked. Before mechanical clocks, cathedrals functioned as communal timekeepers. Salisbury Cathedral's original medieval clock, installed around 1386, used the building's alignment to mark canonical hours, its gears synchronized with sunlight striking specific windows. At Autun, a shaft of light touches the statue of Lazarus precisely on his feast day, July 29th, turning architecture into an almanac. For medieval communities, these weren't abstract symbols but vital tools. The same light that highlighted a saint's face also signaled when to prune vines or start Lenten fasts. Debate still simmers among historians. Some argue these alignments are coincidental, that medieval builders prioritized structural stability over celestial choreography. But the evidence mounts. At St. Sulpice in Paris, a meridian line inlaid in the floor tracks the sun's progress for Easter calculations, while Le Mans Cathedral's Green Man carving catches sunlight only during the spring equinox, his foliage seeming to sprout with the season. Even the orientation of cathedral foundations often follows sacred geometry, with choirs pointing toward sunrise on the patron saint's feast day. What's undeniable is the layered thinking behind these designs. Gothic cathedrals didn't reject pre-Christian knowledge, they baptized it. The same architects who calculated solar alignments also engineered flying buttresses, proving faith and reason weren't opposites but partners. In an age before telescopes, these stone calendars bridged earth and sky, offering congregations a visceral reminder. The same God who set stars in motion also cared when crops should bloom. Next time you visit a Gothic cathedral, glance upward but also watch the floor. The real marvels often arrive on sunbeams. Run your fingers along the base of a Gothic cathedral, and you'll feel the rough, unfinished texture of limestone solid, earthy, unpretentious. Now lift your gaze upward, past the intricately carved saints and prophets, to where the spires pierce the sky, sheathed in gleaming lead or even gold leaf. This isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a vertical journey from the mortal to the divine, written in the very materials themselves. Every stone, every metal, every fleck of pigment was selected not just for durability or beauty, but as a tactile language of sacred hierarchy. Take the humble limestone that forms most cathedral skeletons. Quarried locally, often by monks themselves, its softness allowed intricate carving, yet it hardened with age, mirroring the Christian ideal of spiritual refinement. But notice how the lowest courses are left rugged, their surfaces pocked and uneven, while higher levels transition to smooth ashlar blocks. This visual metaphor wasn't subtle. Humanity began in the dust, but through faith could ascend toward perfection. Even the act of quarrying held meaning. At Canterbury, stone was extracted from lands owned by Christ Church Priory, turning each block into a literal building block of monastic labor, a physical testament to the Benedictine motto Ora et Labora, pray and work. Then there's the alchemy of elevation. As walls climbed heavenward, materials grew more precious. Lead roofs, though practical for waterproofing, also symbolized imperishability. The same metal sealed Roman coffins, hinting at resurrection. Higher still, gilded spires didn't just catch the light. They enacted a daily miracle, transforming sunlight into celestial radiance. The gold leaf covering altars and reliquaries, often applied by specialist craftsmen sworn to secrecy, wasn't mere opulence. In medieval optics, gold was considered frozen light, a tangible echo of God's uncreated glory. To gild an altar was to mark it as a threshold where heaven met earth. Few materials carried more political weight than porphyry, the deep purple stone veined with white that lines Charlemagne's tomb at Aachen. Reserved for Roman emperors since antiquity, its sole quarry was in imperial Egypt. Its reappearance in Christian contexts was a bold statement. Christ was the true emperor, his kingdom outranking earthly dynasties. When Suga imported porphyry columns for St. Denis' high altar, he wasn't just decorating, he was declaring the church's supremacy over secular rulers. Even the difficulty of obtaining it, requiring papal diplomacy with Byzantine and Islamic traders, turned each slab into a relic of sacred geopolitics. But the true mastery lay in juxtaposition. At St. Chapelle, the lower chapel's dim vaults are painted midnight blue with golden floors de lis, evoking the starry cosmos. while the upper chapel's walls vanish into stained glass, a deliberate contrast between the earthly and celestial realms. Pilgrims would ascend from shadow to light, their physical climb mirroring the soul's journey. Even the iron cramps binding stones together were ritually blessed, transforming engineering necessities into sacred ligaments holding God's house intact. What's often forgotten is how these choices resonated with medieval senses. We experience cathedrals as silent monuments, but originally they engaged every faculty. The scent of beeswax candles pure, unblemished like Christ's flesh, the echo of chant bouncing off polished marble, symbolizing the spread of the word, even the taste of consecrated wine at an alabaster altar. Material wasn't just seen, it was felt as theology. A peasant touching a porphyry tomb didn't need Latin to understand. This stone had outlasted empires, just as the saints outlasted death. The message was in the grain. High above the nave of Rheims Cathedral, hidden in the shadows of the triforium, a stonemason's chisel once paused to carve something unexpected, a tiny, perfect fleur-de-lis, no larger than a coin. This wasn't part of the grand design. It was a personal signature, one of thousands of mason marks scattered like secret breadcrumbs across Gothic cathedrals. These enigmatic symbols, geometric shapes, stylized tools, even whimsical animals tell a story the stained glass and soaring arches never could. That these monuments were built not by mythical giants, but by human hands, each worker leaving their indelible whisper in stone. The system was deceptively simple. Medieval stonemasons, organized into guilds that guarded their techniques like state secrets, used these marks to track workmanship. Each artisan had a unique symbol, often derived from their initials or a personal emblem, which they'd carved discreetly into finished stones. At York Minster, you'll find over 2,000 distinct marks, crosses, stars, arrows, each one a medieval barcode linking a block to its creator. This wasn't just about pride, it was practical. If a vault cracked or a column faltered, the guild could trace the flaw back to its maker. In an age before engineering certifications, these marks were both resume and warranty, proving skill without a single written word. But there's more to them than accountability. Some marks cluster in spiritually charged spots near altars, beneath rose windows hinting at a deeper purpose. At Chartres, masons carved Solomon's knots into hidden corners, an ancient symbol of wisdom and protection. Others etched Doedman's eyes, almond-shaped designs believed to ward off evil spirits. These weren't random doodles, they were silent prayers transforming tools into talismans. Even the act of carving held ritual significance. Masons often worked by candlelight, their marks facing inward toward the sacred space, as if sealing their devotion into the very bones of the building. The most poignant marks are those that defy explanation. In Lincoln Cathedral, a tiny carving shows a woman's face, rare in an all-male profession, while Canterbury boasts a comical grotesque sticking its tongue out. Were these inside jokes, memorials to loved ones, the truth is lost, but their humanity remains. Unlike the cathedral's formal sculptures, these marks feel intimate, unfiltered. They remind us that between the blueprints of bishops and the sermons in glass, there were real people, hands calloused from lifting limestone, backs aching from scaffolding, yet still pausing to say, "I was here." Modern technology reveals even more secrets. Laser scans at Strasbourg Cathedral detected marks invisible to the naked eye, including compass-drawn pentagrams used to calculate complex vault angles. These weren't occult symbols but mathematical aids, proving that Gothic engineering relied on geometry as much as faith. Some marks even form hidden sequences, like those at Wells Cathedral, where a trail of crescents leads to a master mason's signature slab, a quiet boast of authorship amidst the anonymity of collective labor. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in their imperfection. Unlike the flawless saints adorning portals, mason marks are often uneven, their lines wavering where the chisel slipped. That's what makes them sacred. They prove that cathedrals weren't born perfect. They were made stone by ordinary people capable of both brilliance and error. Next time you visit, look beyond the grand visions of bishops and architects. Search for those tiny, stubborn scratches, the true handwriting of the men who built heaven on earth, one mark at a time. Step through the north transept of Canterbury Cathedral, and you'll collide with a stone tapestry so intricate it seems to breathe, the choir screen, a lacework of arches and statues rising like a sacred fence between worlds. This wasn't mere decoration, it was architecture as theology. While the nave welcomed all peasant and prince alike, the choir beyond this screen belonged solely to the clergy, a holy of holies where Latin chants swirled unseen. The screen's very existence whispered a medieval truth, that access to the divine was tiered, its mysteries revealed only to those ordained to mediate them. Look closer at Canterbury's screen, and you'll find stone Bibles frozen in motion. Scenes from Christ's life unfold in high relief, the Annunciation, the Nativity, the Crucifixion, each panel a chapter in a story most worshippers couldn't read but could understand. The Magi kneel forever on one side, their gifts mirroring the offerings pilgrims brought to the altar. On another, Lazarus rises from his tomb, his stone shroud unwinding just as the screen itself unwound spiritual truths for the illiterate. These carvings weren't just art, they were pedagogy. A peasant who'd never held a Bible could trace the screen's narratives like a rosary, learning doctrine through their fingertips. Naumburg Cathedral's screen takes this further, its sculptures charged with emotional electricity. Here, Christ's passion plays out with raw humanity, Judas' face twisted in remorse, Peter's hands clenched as the rooster crows. The figures aren't static icons but actors mid-scene, their agony and ecstasy so vivid you expect them to step from the stone. This was theater as theology, designed to provoke visceral reactions. When a medieval worshipper saw Naumburg's Weeping Mary, they didn't just observe grief, they felt it, bridging the gap between biblical time and their own. Yet these screens hid more than sculptures. Some, like the one at Strasbourg before its destruction, had hidden doors that swung open during Easter plays. Actors portraying angels would burst from the choir, symbolically heaven, to announce the resurrection to the crowd in the nave, the earthly realm. The screen became a stage curtain between dimensions, its temporary opening a thrilling rupture of the ordinary. For illiterate congregations, these dramas weren't entertainment. They were scripture made flesh, the screen itself a character in the story. The Reformation shattered this visual language. Reformers saw screens as barriers to direct communion with God, and countless were demolished. At Canterbury, the screen statues lost their heads to iconoclasts' hammers. At St. Paul's in London, the entire structure vanished, but the fragments that survived tell a deeper story. Where paint still clings to Naumburg's screen, you can see traces of azure and gold, proof that these barriers weren't austere dividers but radiant thresholds, glowing with color to signal the glory just beyond reach. What remains is a paradox. These screens both separated and connected, excluded and enlightened. They drew lines between sacred and profane, even as their carvings made the divine tangible. In their shadow, medieval worshippers understood their place in the cosmic order close enough to glimpse the mystery, but never to touch it without a guide. The screens may be fractured now, but their message endures. That faith has always lived in the tension between revelation and concealment, between what we're shown and what we must imagine. In the dim crypt of Cologne Cathedral, beneath tons of carved stone and centuries of whispered prayers, rests a single gilded casket no larger than a child's arm. Inside lies what believers have venerated for nearly 2,000 years, a fragile fragment of bone, said to belong to the three magi themselves. This isn't just a relic, it's the reason Cologne's spires scrape the sky. Medieval architects didn't design this monumental space for Sunday sermons alone. They built it as a jewel box for one sacred object, turning an entire city into a pilgrimage site. The staggering truth, this pattern repeated across Europe, where cathedrals often rose not for practical need, but to house fragments of saints, martyrs, and biblical figures, each relic transforming humble towns into spiritual powerhouses overnight. The cult of relics wasn't merely devotion, it was spiritual economics. In a world without tourism boards or trade fairs, a single saint's bone could mint a town's fortune. Take Conques, a remote village in the French mountains. Its abbey church, a Romanesque masterpiece, became a major stop on the Camino de Santiago solely because it acquired the relics of Saint Foy, a 12-year-old martyr. Her golden reliquary, shaped like a wide-eyed child enthroned, drew crowds so vast the monks built a 3-story gallery to manage the flow. Pilgrims believed proximity to relics conferred blessings, curing illness, absolving sins, and they paid handsomely for the chance. The coins they left funded ever grander buildings, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. More impressive architecture attracted more pilgrims, which funded more construction. Reliquaries themselves were feats of theological theater. Many took the form of the body parts they contained: a silver arm cradling a forearm bone, a crystal foot encasing a toe. At Aachen Cathedral, Charlemagne's arm reliquary stretches forward as if still ruling, while Venice's San Marco displays a tooth of Saint Mark in a glass-paned lion's mouth, merging the evangelist's symbol with his remains. These designs weren't macabre, they made the invisible tangible. For medieval believers, the saint wasn't dead but present, their reliquary a kind of spiritual telephone booth where heaven and earth could connect. The scramble to acquire relics bordered on obsession. When Venice stole Saint Mark's body from Alexandria in 827, they smuggled it past Muslim guards by hiding it under layers of porphyry, a substance no inspector would touch. Chartres Cathedral's prized relic, the Sancta Camisa, was said to be the Virgin Mary's tunic, acquired through a mix of diplomacy and royal patronage. Towns without relics sometimes resorted to pious fraud, like the monks of Glastonbury who discovered King Arthur's bones just as their abbey needed funds. The irony, even fake relics often sparked real devotion, proving architecture's power to sanctify belief itself. This frenzy reshaped Europe's map. Tiny Vézelay, perched on a hilltop with no strategic importance, became a crusade launch point because it housed Mary Magdalene's supposed bones. Santiago de Compostela, once a backwater, grew into a metropolis thanks to St. James' remains. The competition was so fierce that after the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204, the loot wasn't just gold, it was relics. Saint Chapelle in Paris was essentially built as a reliquary for the crown of thorns, its walls of glass meant to emulate the jeweled casket inside. What's often forgotten is how relics influenced architectural innovation. Shrines needed to display treasures while protecting them, leading to clever designs like ambulatories, walkways encircling the apse so pilgrims could flow past relics without disrupting services. At Canterbury, the martyrdom site of Thomas Becket became a vertical pilgrimage, with stairs worn smooth by knees climbing to touch the spot where his blood stained the floor. Even flying buttresses served a relic-driven purpose. By transferring weight outward, they allowed taller, thinner walls with more windows, flooding sacred objects with divine light. The legacy lingers. Modern visitors might scoff at the idea of a cathedral built for a finger bone, but the psychology remains familiar. Aren't our own museums, with their carefully lit displays of moon rocks or dinosaur skeletons, secular reliquaries? The difference is scale. Where we preserve history, medieval builders enshrined eternity, one fragment at a time. Next time you stand beneath Cologne's vaults, remember, this forest of stone grew from a single seed. Paris didn't just build Notre Dame to honor the Virgin Mary. It also raised a rival shrine to Saint Genevieve, the city's scholarly patron who supposedly saved it from Attila the Hun. Meanwhile, across Normandy, Mont Saint-Michel's Abbey bristled with fortifications under the warrior archangel's watch. These choices weren't accidents. A cathedral's patron saint acted as a medieval mission statement, telegraphing a city's identity to pilgrims and political foes alike. Genevieve's quiet intellect suited Paris' growing university culture, while Michael's sword reflected Normandy's militarized borderlands. Even the saints' feast days shaped architecture. Churches like Durham Cathedral aligned their high altars to catch sunrise on their patron's day, turning astronomy into allegiance. Consider the competition between Tours and Chartres in the 12th century. Both venerated the Virgin Mary, but Tours one-upped its rival by claiming her actual cloak as a relic. Chartres retaliated with something bolder, a cathedral so magnificent it became the Virgin's palace, its sculptures showing local merchants presenting her with miniature models of the building itself. This wasn't piety, it was civic one-upmanship in stone. Wealthy towns flaunted their patron saints like modern sports teams, with processions transforming feast days into street theater. In Siena, the Palio horse race still follows medieval routes past the Duomo, where the Virgin's icon oversees the finish line, proof that sacred branding outlasted the Middle Ages. Royal influence twisted these dedications further. When King Philip Augustus rebuilt Paris's Sainte-Chapelle to house the crown of thorns, he wasn't just honoring Christ, he was one-upping the Holy Roman Emperor, whose relics paled in comparison. Similarly, England's Norman conquerors replaced Anglo-Saxon saints like Edward the Confessor with martial figures like George, whose dragon-slaying imagery mirrored their expansionist dreams. The message was clear: saints weren't just intercessors, they were celestial endorsers of earthly power. The most fascinating dedications, though, emerged from disaster. After the Black Death wiped out half of Europe, cities rushed to adopt plague saints like Sebastian or Roch. Venice went further, rebranding itself under Saint Mark after stealing his body from Alexandria, then using his winged lion symbol on everything from flags to fortress gates. Overnight, the evangelist became the Republic's mascot, his biblical authority legitimizing Venetian naval ambitions. Even the humble could play this game. When the fishing village of Lycia lacked a superstar saint, they promoted their local bishop Theobald as a patron of salt merchants, crafting miracles that tied his cult to the region's economic lifeblood. These choices still echo today. Walk the Camino de Santiago, and you're following a medieval tourist trail engineered by Compostella's clever monks, who turned St. James into Spain's answer to Rome. Or visit Cologne, where the Magi's relics transformed a backwater into an imperial city. What began as spiritual devotion became urban strategy, proof that in the Middle Ages, the road to heaven was paved with holy branding. Close your eyes in the nave of York Minster, and you'll hear something extraordinary, the lingering echo of a single note hovering in the air like a ghostly choir. This isn't just acoustics, it's sacred geometry made audible. Medieval builders didn't just calculate vault heights for structural stability, they tuned them like instruments, crafting reverberation times that could stretch a Gregorian chant's final Amen into a celestial sigh. The very stones seem to sing, amplifying human voices into something unearthly. The science behind this is astonishing. York Minster's nave stretches 270 feet, its ribbed vaults rising 99 feet, dimensions that weren't arbitrary. Modern acoustic studies reveal its reverberation time peaks at 8 seconds, perfect for chant frequencies between 100 and 1000 Hz. That's no accident. Master masons likely used ropes and weighted lines to test sound reflections during construction, adjusting pillars and arches until the space remembered each note just long enough to feel divine. Some chapels, like the Lady Chapel at Ely Cathedral, were even designed with concave surfaces to create whispering gallery effects, where a priest's murmur could travel clearly to the farthest pew, a medieval microphone carved from limestone. But the magic goes deeper than physics. Many believe Gothic architects encoded musical ratios into their blueprints. The width-to-height proportions of Chartres Cathedral's choir, for instance, mirror the interval of a perfect fifth, the same harmonious leap found in medieval chant. At St. Denis, Abbott-Suga reportedly consulted musicians to align the abbey's columns with Pythagorean scales, turning the entire building into a frozen hymn. Even the labyrinth underfoot might have functioned as a resonance chamber. Walk its path, and your footsteps could trigger low-frequency vibrations felt more than heard, like the rumble of distant thunder. Listen closely in certain chapels, and you'll catch something stranger: deliberate acoustic illusions. In Rosslyn Chapel near Edinburgh, carved sound boxes adorn the pillars, their shapes matching Chladni patterns, the visible vibration sand makes when scattered on metal plates. Some theorists suggest these were blueprints for lost musical frequencies, while others claim the chapel's lay out-generates standing waves that amplify specific tones. Whether by design or serendipity, the effect is uncanny. Sing the right note, and the air itself seems to hum in response. This sonic symbolism wasn't just artistic flair, it was theological engineering. Medieval thinkers believed the universe itself vibrated with divine harmony, the music of the spheres described by Pythagoras and later Christianized by Boethius. A cathedral that could sing didn't just mimic heaven's order, it became a conduit for it. When a monk's chant echoed 7 seconds instead of 5, that wasn't an architectural quirk, it was the building joining the prayer, its stones adding their own silent amen. Modern choirs still seek out these sacred acoustics. The Tallis scholars famously record in Merton College Chapel, where the 16th century vaults blur individual voices into a seamless tapestry, exactly as medieval composers intended. It's a reminder that Gothic architecture wasn't just seen or touched, but heard. Next time you stand beneath those vaults, don't just look up, stay silent and let the space speak. The past isn't just written in stone, it's whispered in the air between them. Blue in Chartres windows wasn't just a color, it was a theological declaration. Crafted from crushed lapis lazuli hauled from Afghan mines at staggering cost, this celestial hue cloaked the Virgin Mary and Christ in robes of divine wisdom. The rarity of the pigment spoke volumes. Medieval worshippers understood that true wisdom, like the stone itself, had to be painstakingly mined and purified. On overcast days, these blues would deepen into something almost mournful, but when sunlight struck, the glass transformed into pools of liquid sapphire, a visual metaphor for how divine truth could illuminate even the darkest human understanding. Red played a more visceral role, created by suspending gold particles in glass, a technique lost for centuries. These ruby panes literally shone with embedded treasure. When dawn light hit the Passion windows, the effect was shockingly literal. Christ's crucifixion scene dripped with liquid crimson, as if the stones themselves bled. This wasn't subtle symbolism. For pilgrims who'd traveled weeks to reach Chartres, the red glass made theology visceral, turning abstract ideas of sacrifice into something that pulsed with every heartbeat of light. Green held quieter power. Unlike the jewel tones above, many greens were mixed from local plants and copper oxides, grounding them in the earthly realm. Yet their placement told another story. In the resurrection windows, emerald glass often framed Christ stepping from the tomb, his halo intersecting with spring green foliage, a deliberate visual link between his triumph and the annual rebirth of nature. Farmers viewing these panels would immediately connect the gospel to their own fields thawing after winter, making cosmic events feel intimately local. The directionality of light added yet another layer. Morning sun streaming through eastern windows painted Noah's Ark in hopeful golds, while the same light piercing north-facing passion scenes later in the day took on a cooler, more somber tone as the sun dipped. Architects even accounted for seasonal shifts. The winter solstice sun aligns perfectly with Chartres' Jesse tree window, setting the messianic lineage aglow on the year's darkest day. This chromatic choreography turned the cathedral into a celestial clock, where theology unfolded in real time through shifting palettes. Modern restorers face an extraordinary challenge. Traditional methods involved potash from burned oak ferns and cobalt from German mines, materials nearly impossible to source today. At Sainte-Chapelle, conservators discovered 13th-century artisans used manganese to create sun purple, a hue that appears violet in shade but bursts into gold under direct light, mimicking divine radiance. By reverse engineering these recipes using spectral analysis, teams preserve not just colors, but their medieval symbolic language. A single misstep, say, replacing ruby glass with a cheaper cadmium red, could mute the theological message as surely as a mistranslated Bible verse. What's often overlooked is how these colors interacted with candlelight. After sunset, the windows didn't go dark, they transformed. Flames behind red glass made martyrs' scenes flicker like living embers, while votive candles under blue panels cast watery reflections on stone floors. This nocturnal chromatic dance reminded night worshippers that divine truths weren't confined to daylight, just as faith persisted beyond visible light. The true test of this symbolism's power, even colorblind pilgrims reported seeing the right hues, proof that context and belief could override physical perception. When a modern visitor described Chartres' famous Chartres blue as gray, a docile simply nodded. Then for you, wisdom wears different robes. The glass may dictate the palette, but the human heart completes the vision. Look closely at the carved capitals of Lincoln Cathedral, and you'll spot them faces peering through veils of oak leaves, their mouths stretched in silent laughter as vines spill from their lips like botanical secrets. These are the green men, nature's mischievous ambassadors in the heart of Gothic sanctuaries. Far from solemn saints or stern prophets, they're earthy outliers in heaven's architecture, their leafy visages winding around column capitals and ceiling bosses from England to Bohemia. One moment they're playful with acorns sprouting from their eyebrows, the next almost eerie, their foliage morphing into serpentine tendrils. Theories about their origins twist as unpredictably as their stems. Some scholars see them as pagan holdovers, the Celtic Cernunnos or Roman Dionysus baptized into Christian stone, their presence a quiet compromise with older nature cults. At Southwell Minster, a green man's face disgorges an entire orchard from his mouth, as if the cathedral itself is exhaling spring. Could this be a nod to the medieval belief in the Spiritus Mundi, the world's soul connecting all living things? Others argue they're purely Christian symbols, the leafy cross motif made flesh, representing resurrection through nature's cycles. A green man at Norwich Cathedral even wears a crown of thorns, his vines echoing Christ's promise. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone. Then there's the Mason theory. Stonemasons, after all, spent years cloistered in lodges, their inside jokes and workshop trademarks etched into sacred stone. The green men's grins might simply be craftsmen's signatures, like doodles in a cathedral's margins. At Ripon Cathedral, one capital shows a leafy face beside a rabbit stealing grapes, hardly theological imagery, but proof that humor crept into even the holiest spaces. What's undeniable is their placement. Green men cluster where transitions happen: doorways, choir screens, the points where nave meets transept. Their thresholds incarnate, rooted in the earth while gazing upward, much like the cathedrals themselves. At Ely Cathedral, a green man near the Lady Chapel sprouts delicate maple leaves, his face serene amid the stone foliage. But climb to the roof bosses, and his cousins become wilder, their features half consumed by hawthorn and ivy, as if the forest is reclaiming them. Modern visitors often miss them, these quiet rebels of the sacred order. Yet once you start looking, they're everywhere, lurking in shadowed corners, grinning from rain-spouted gargoyles, even tucked into the folds of a saint's robe. They resist easy interpretation, and perhaps that's the point. In a world where every stained glass panel had doctrinal clarity, the green men remained deliciously ambiguous. They whisper that faith isn't just about soaring toward heaven, but about remembering the soil from which we grow, the messy, vital, ever-sprouting earth that cradles every spire's foundation. Next time you enter a cathedral, let your eyes wander downward. The holiest faces aren't always the ones bathed in stained glass light. Sometimes they're the ones winking at you from the shadows, leaves curling from their lips like unspoken truths. Approaching the west portal of Abbott-Suga Cathedral, you're met with a stone sermon more vivid than any fire and brimstone preacher could deliver. The tympanum here doesn't just depict the Last Judgment, it performs it, with Christ enthroned at the center, his mandorla radiating like a celestial sun, while angels and demons wage tug of war over human souls. To the left, the saved rise in orderly lines, their faces serene as they're ushered toward pearly gates carved with the delicacy of lace. To the right, chaos reigns, naked figures contort in agony as hook-nosed demons stuff them headfirst into helmets, gaping stone maws that seem to exhale the stench of sulfur. This wasn't art for art's sake. It was spiritual propaganda carved at eye level for maximum impact, a medieval morality play frozen in limestone. What's chilling is the specificity. At Conks, St. Foy's tympanum shows a miser's purse hanging around his neck in hell, its strings strangling him, a direct warning to wealthy pilgrims reluctant to donate. At Burgess, a lustful woman's punishment is depicted with graphic clarity. Snakes coil around her breasts while toads gnaw at her genitals. These scenes weren't generic. They targeted the sins most tempting to local communities. Farmers seeing Abbott-Suga's gluttony demons force-feeding sinners molten gold would think twice before overindulging at harvest feasts. The message was clear. Morality wasn't abstract but had immediate, visceral consequences. The genius lay in their placement. Tympanums acted as spiritual airlocks, the last thing worshippers saw before stepping into sacred space. At Vézelay, pilgrims en route to Santiago would pass beneath a Christ radiating beams of light toward distant pagan lands, their mission literally framed as divinely ordained. The threshold itself became part of the story. Crossing it meant leaving worldly vices outside, just as the saved in the carvings crossed from chaos into order. Even the archivolts, those concentric arches framing the scene, played a role, often filled with zodiac signs or labors of the months, reminders that judgment came within time's inexorable flow. Modern eyes might dismiss these as medieval scare tactics, but their psychology was sophisticated. The damned weren't faceless masses but recognizable types, a baker with his loaf, a knight with his sword, making hell uncomfortably relatable. At Moisac, a claustrophobic crowd of resurrected souls pressed toward the judging Christ, their expressions ranging from hope to horror. What's missing? The actual moment of verdict. Artists left that to the viewer's imagination, forcing each passerby to mentally complete the scene with themselves in it. The true masterstroke was balance. For every demon there was an angel, for every gnashing helmet, a graceful hand offering mercy. Even the composition soothed even as it terrified. The orderly lines of the saved mirrored the cathedral's columns, while hell's chaos echoed the unpredictable world outside. These tympanums didn't just threaten, they offered a roadmap to safety. Step inside, repent, and this could be you among the blessed. No wonder so many medieval conversions happened at church doors, under the watchful eyes of stone angels and the grinning jaws of eternal fire. Walk the cloister of Santo Domingo de Silos in Spain, and you'll pass beneath exactly 12 arches, not 11, not 13. Each one frames a space where monks once paced in prayer, their footsteps echoing the number of Christ's apostles. This wasn't architectural coincidence, it was sacred mathematics carved in stone. Gothic cathedrals didn't just use numbers, they spoke through them, embedding numerical codes that whispered secrets to those who could count. 7 windows might represent the sacraments, 3 lancets the Trinity, and 40 columns the days of Lent. Every measurement held meaning, turning buildings into 3-dimensional Bibles for an age when few could read the written word. Consider the mystery of the number 153. At Canterbury Cathedral, sharp-eyed visitors spot this exact number of fish carved into a misericord, a seemingly random tally until you recall John's Gospel, where the resurrected Christ instructs his disciples to cast their nets, resulting in a miraculous catch of 153 fish. Medieval theologians obsessed over this number, with Augustine himself decoding it as the sum of all integers from 1 to 17, a metaphor for the completeness of salvation. By etching this figure into choir stalls and stained glass, architects wove scripture into the very fabric of worship, rewarding the devout with layers of revelation. The obsession with sacred geometry went deeper than ornamentation. At Chartres, the Labyrinth's path measures exactly 262 meters, a number mirroring the days of Mary's pregnancy, transforming the walk into a symbolic gestation of faith. Even structural elements followed divine ratios. The golden ratio, approximately 1.618, appears repeatedly in choir screens and spire heights, reflecting the medieval belief that God had stamped mathematical perfection onto creation. When masons laid out foundations using compasses and ropes, they weren't just engineering, they were tracing the fingerprints of the divine. Some numbers carried political weight. The 12 prophets flanking Rheims Cathedral's facade didn't just echo the apostles, they subtly equated French kings with biblical rulers, legitimizing their authority through numerology. Meanwhile, Cistercian monks took austerity to mathematical extremes, designing abbeys where every dimension reduced to multiples of 3, reinforcing their devotion to the Trinity. A single misstep, say, a nave 1 foot too long could disrupt the spiritual resonance, so master builders guarded their calculations as closely as holy relics. What's astonishing is how these codes transcended borders. From England's Durham Cathedral to Germany's Naumburg, the same numbers reappear like a celestial drumbeat. 7, representing completion, shapes everything from Strasbourg's spire tiers to the days of creation depicted in Canterbury's glass. 40, evoking trials from Noah's flood to Christ's desert fast, dictates the steps in monastic staircases and the pillars in Burgo's cloister. Even the humble number 5, symbolizing Christ's wounds, surfaces in quatrefoils and pentagonal chapels across Europe. Modern eyes might dismiss this as superstition, but the medieval mind saw numbers as living threads in creation's tapestry. When a monk counted 12 arches or 153 fish, he wasn't just tallying, he was communing with a universe where mathematics and mysticism shared a common root. Next time you visit a cathedral, bring a tape measure. The stones have been waiting centuries to tell you their secrets. Beneath the soaring arches of Canterbury Cathedral, hidden in the crypt's shadows, lies a natural spring that has never run dry even during the fiercest droughts. This isn't just a water source, it's a sacred thread stitching together pagan reverence and Christian ritual. Long before the cathedral's stones were laid, pilgrims gathered here to honor the ancient British water deities, believing the spring's clarity held healing powers. When Augustine arrived in 597 to convert the Anglo-Saxons, he didn't suppress the spring's worship, he baptized it. The water that once blessed pagan infants now flowed into the cathedral's octagonal baptismal font, its 8 sides echoing early Christian theology, 6 for the days of creation, 1 for rest, and the 8th symbolizing resurrection and eternity. The font itself became a spiritual compass, its shape reminding initiates that baptism wasn't just cleansing, it was rebirth into a new, unending day. Step closer to that font, and you'll notice something startling. The drain beneath it often twists into the gaping mouth of a stone dragon. This isn't mere decoration. Medieval minds saw water as a cosmic conduit. As it poured over a child's head, it carried away original sin, and the dragon's gullet channeled that impurity underground, banishing evil with every drop. At Wells Cathedral, the dragon drains are so cunningly carved they seem to snarl as they swallow, turning something as mundane as plumbing into a theological drama. Even the gargoyles, those rain-spouting grotesques, played their part, their spewing mouths transforming stormwater into a symbolic exorcism of the building itself. But the holiest waters often lay outside cathedral walls, holy wells like England's Chalice Well, crowned with its blood-red iron-rich waters, or Ireland's St. Bridget's Well, draped in clouty rags left by seekers, became satellites of sacred hydration. At Glastonbury, the Chalice Well's coverstone is pierced with a perfect vesica piscis, the almond-shaped intersection of 2 circles that symbolized Christ's dual nature. Pilgrims would lower cups into this geometric womb, drawing up water infused with divine mystery. These sites weren't competitors to cathedral fonts. They were collaborators in a hydrological network of grace, each spring and drain a node in a landscape humming with liquid holiness. The rituals around these waters reveal their layered meaning. In medieval Norwich, priests would bless the city's rivers annually by throwing a crucifix into the current, a practice echoing pre-Christian offerings to river gods. At Canterbury, Easter baptisms coincided with the spring equinox, aligning the resurrection of Christ with the earth's reawakening. Even the act of moving water held symbolism. Monks carrying holy water in a sposauria, those perforated vessels used to sprinkle congregations, traced the same paths processions had walked for centuries, their steps mapping invisible ley lines between font, altar, and well. What modern visitors often miss is the sheer audacity of medieval hydraulics. Before lead pipes and pressurized systems, cathedrals engineered elaborate water channels using gravity and gradients. Durham Cathedral's monastic lavatorium, where monks washed before meals, drew from a hidden aqueduct that also fed the baptismal font, a circulatory system mimicking the blood of Christ nourishing the spiritual body. At Rheims, rainwater collected from the roof was funneled into a vast underground cistern, its cool depth symbolizing the Jordan River's enduring flow. These weren't just technical feats, they were sacramental acts turning infrastructure into liturgy. Perhaps the most poignant water symbolism lies in what's absent. In drought-stricken regions like Spain's Los Medulas, cathedrals built dry fonts, empty stone basins that stood as stark reminders of water's scarcity and spiritual thirst. Pilgrims would touch these hollows and pray for rain, their fingers tracing the ghost of a liquid that was both physical necessity and divine metaphor. Even in destruction, water's sacred role endured. When the Thames froze during London's Little Ice Age, enterprising priests carved ice fonts for impromptu baptisms, proving faith could melt even the hardest barriers. Today, as you dip your fingers into a cathedral's holy water stoup, you're touching more than a ritual, you're connecting to a primal memory. The same hands that once cupped water from sacred springs now flick droplets toward heart and forehead, tracing an unbroken line back to when the divine wasn't just above but below, bubbling up from the dark earth itself. The stones may point to heaven, but the water reminds us, holiness also rises from below. The first thing to understand about Gothic cathedrals is that we've been seeing them wrong for centuries. Walk into Notre Dame today and you're met with a symphony of grey, the cool, muted tones of limestone and shadow, but flashback 800 years and that same space would have assaulted your senses with color. Statues weren't left bare, they blazed with lapis blues, vermilion reds, and gilded halos that caught the candlelight like living flame. Even the arches overhead weren't naked stone, they were painted with intricate patterns mimicking celestial fabrics, as if heaven's canopy had been lowered into the nave. Recent breakthroughs in ultraviolet imaging have revealed just how vibrant these lost interiors were. At Amiens Cathedral, researchers scanning the apostles lining the choir stumbled upon microscopic flecks of pigment clinging to the stone. Under UV light, these particles fluoresced into a shocking palette. Virgin Mary's robes weren't just blue but a specific shade called bleu de Saint Denis, mixed from crushed Afghan lapis and egg yolk. The blood dripping from Christ's side in crucifixion scenes, not symbolic rust but genuine cinnabar red, a mercury-based pigment so expensive it was reserved for divinity. Even the backgrounds weren't neutral, they shimmered with foam marble finishes and gold leaf so thick it had to be burnished with agate stones to achieve a mirror-like glow. This polychromy wasn't just decorative, it was doctrinal. In an era when most congregants were illiterate, color acted as a theological shorthand. Gold equaled divinity, blue signaled heavenly grace, and green, often made from malachite, represented resurrection and earthly renewal. At Chartres, the Trumeau figure of Christ was once entirely gilded, his golden skin visually declaring his dual nature as both human and divine. Meanwhile, demons and villains were painted in sickly greens or ashy grays, their hues telegraphing moral corruption before a single biblical word was spoken. The entire cathedral functioned like a spiritual traffic light, guiding eyes and souls toward salvation through chromatic cues. The challenge of restoring these colors today is staggering. At Sainte-Chapelle, conservators spent years analyzing paint fragments under electron microscopes to recreate the original 13th century palette. One breakthrough came from an unlikely source: medieval recipe books. Benedictine monks often recorded pigment formulas in their manuscripts, detailing how to mix everything from Tyrian purple, extracted from Mediterranean sea snails, to verdigris, the vibrant green made by suspending copper plates over vinegar. By cross-referencing these texts with chemical analyzers, teams can now approximate the exact hues that once dazzled worshippers. The result: a newly repainted angel at Sainte-Chapelle doesn't just look golden, it moves like gold, its surface catching light at the same angles described in Abbott-Suga's journals. What's most poignant is how these colors interacted with medieval light. Unlike modern electric bulbs, candlelight was dynamic, flickering across pigments in unpredictable ways. A vermilion robe might appear blood red at dawn, then deepen to near black by evening, mirroring Christ's sacrifice in real time. Gilding, too, played tricks. Statues near altars were often burnished to reflect candle flames, making halos seem to hover slightly apart from the stone, as if imbued with supernatural energy. Even the act of seeing was different, with interiors often smoky from incense and tallow. Colors would blur and blend, creating a dreamlike atmosphere where the boundaries between art and miracle dissolved. The implications are profound. We've long imagined Gothic cathedrals as austere spaces, their beauty lying in structural purity, but the truth is messier, more human. These were buildings designed to overwhelm, to stun peasants and kings alike with a sensory overload of holiness. The next time you stand in a cathedral's echoing nave, try squinting. Behind the grey, if you look closely enough, you might just catch a ghost of what once was, a world where stone breathed color, and heaven wasn't an abstract idea, but something you could see. Climb the narrow spiral staircase tucked behind an unremarkable door in Wells Cathedral, and you'll emerge into a space no wider than a broom closet, the so-called librarian's cell. This tiny chamber, barely large enough to turn around in, sits high above the nave, its single slit-like window offering a hawk's eye view of the choir below. Why would anyone need such a cramped perch? The answer lies in medieval monastic life, where knowledge was as closely guarded as gold. From this vantage point, a watchful monk could ensure no precious manuscript went missing during study hours, his hidden presence a silent deterrent against temptation. But not all secret spaces were so pragmatic. At Durham Cathedral, mysterious round openings called oculi pierce the walls of the Galilee Chapel, small, perfectly circular windows positioned at odd angles. Peer through one, and you'll find it frames the high altar with unnerving precision. Some historians believe these were spiritual peepholes, allowing sick or quarantined worshippers to witness Mass without risking contagion. Others speculate they served as medieval surveillance points, enabling clergy to monitor pilgrims flocking to St. Cuthbert's shrine below. The truth may be simpler yet profound. These apertures transformed the act of seeing into a sacred ritual, a physical reminder that glimpses of the divine often come indirectly through narrow passages of faith. For every documented hideaway, there are staircases that twist into oblivion. Lincoln Cathedral boasts a spiral stair leading to a solid wall, a feature that likely once accessed a long-vanished rood screen or relic chamber. These architectural ghosts hint at how fluid cathedrals were, constantly adapted to new rituals, political pressures, or even structural repairs. A passage sealed during one era might be reopened centuries later, its original purpose lost to time. At York Minster, workers restoring the tower stumbled upon a forgotten chamber filled with medieval masons' tools, a snapshot of construction frozen mid-effort, as if the builders had just stepped away for lunch. The most tantalizing spaces are those that fuel legend. Glastonbury Abbey's secretum, a subterranean vault mentioned in cryptic ledgers, was said to hold Joseph of Arimathea's famed Holy Grail. While no such chamber has been found, the myth persists, woven into the abbey's lore. Similarly, Chartres' Labyrinth isn't just a floor pattern. Local tradition claims it sits atop a network of pre-Christian tunnels, though archaeologists remain skeptical. What's undeniable is how these stories shape our experience of cathedrals, turning cold stone into vessels for collective imagination. Perhaps no hidden space is more poignant than the Leper Squints, found in churches across Europe, narrow slanting windows cut through thick walls at ankle height. These allowed those afflicted with leprosy, banished from entering sacred spaces, to peer inside during services. At St. Mary's in Fairford, one such squint aligns perfectly with the altar, ensuring the excluded could still glimpse the Eucharist. In these quiet corners, Gothic architecture reveals its deepest truth. That holiness wasn't confined to grand vistas but thrived in the overlooked, the concealed, and the mercifully designed. The next time you visit a cathedral, don't just look forward, glance sideways. That odd protrusion in the wall, that unexplained step up, that patch of masonry slightly lighter than the rest, each is a breadcrumb left by centuries of human ingenuity, whispering that the real magic lies not in what's displayed, but in what waits patiently hidden for the curious to uncover. The fiery reds and celestial blues of medieval stained glass didn't just happen. They were born from a furnace of ingenuity, faith, and global trade that would put modern supply chains to shame. Picture a workshop in 12th century Chartres, where glassmakers worked like alchemists, feeding chunks of silica sand into clay crucibles alongside unexpected ingredients, powdered gold for ruby reds, cobalt ore hauled from German mines for those impossible blues, even the ashes of Mediterranean seaweed to stabilize the molten mix. This was no ordinary glassmaking, this was pot metal alchemy, where raw materials underwent literal transfiguration in the heat of the forge, emerging as sheets of luminous color that seemed to hold light rather than transmit it. The true magic lay in the chemistry. Unlike modern stained glass painted with surface enamels, pot metal glass gets its color from metallic oxides dissolved directly into the molten silica. When sunlight streams through a cobalt blue panel at Sainte-Chapelle, you're not seeing pigment, you're witnessing actual cobalt atoms suspended in the glass matrix, filtering white light into divine sapphire. Gold's role is even more astonishing. Adding gold chloride to the melt didn't produce gold hues but deep rubies, a quirk of nanoscale gold particles scattering light that medieval craftsmen exploited centuries before scientists understood the physics. These weren't colors applied to glass, they were molecular transformations, turning base metals into vessels of sacred luminosity. Securing these materials required networks stretching across continents. Lapis lazuli for ultramarine blue traveled from Afghan mines along the Silk Road, passing through Venetian merchants who traded it for Baltic amber. Spanish conquistadors later plundered Aztec temples not just for gold, but for cochineal insects, their crushed bodies yielding a crimson dye that found its way into cathedral glass. The logistics were staggering. To glaze Chartres' 176 windows required over 4,000 square meters of glass, each batch custom colored for its theological role. Blues for Marian devotion, reds for Christ's sacrifice, greens for resurrection, every hue carried doctrinal weight as precise as the Latin chants echoing beneath them. What's often overlooked is how these colors behaved differently than modern glass. Medieval reds appear almost opaque until backlit, when they suddenly ignite like embers, a quality that made crucifixion scenes visceral at sunset. Blues, by contrast, glow brightest under cloud cover, their cool tones cutting through gloom. Craftsmen exploited these quirks by positioning colors strategically. Heavenly blues in north facing windows to combat shadows, fiery reds in western facades to catch the dying sun. The glass wasn't just colored, it was choreographed, its performance changing with the hour and season like a celestial clock. The theological symbolism ran as deep as the craftsmanship. Medieval thinkers saw stained glass as a metaphor for the incarnation, ordinary matter infused with divine radiance, just as Christ's humanity housed his divinity. When Abbott-Suga described the gems in his windows as material lights leading to immaterial light, he wasn't being poetic, he was articulating a physics of the sacred. Even the lead caming holding glass pieces together played a role. Its dark lines represented the framework of scripture supporting the luminous truths within. Modern conservators face near impossible challenges preserving this legacy. Original medieval glass recipes relied on inconsistent local sands and impure minerals, giving each pane unique optical properties. When restorers at Canterbury Cathedral tried recreating the sanguine red using modern materials, the result was garish rather than glowing until they added iron filings from a nearby medieval forge site, replicating the accidental contaminants that gave the originals their depth. Such discoveries reveal how medieval craftsmen turned imperfections into advantages, their flaws producing colors we still can't perfectly replicate. Stand before a Gothic rose window at noon, and you'll understand why these craftsmen were considered more than artisans. They were light's theologians, working in a medium that didn't just depict the divine but mediated it. Every beam passing through their glass was filtered through earthly elements made precious by human ingenuity, proving that transcendence could be, quite literally, built. As we step back from these stone scriptures, their messages linger, not just in vaults and glass, but in the way they shaped cities, minds, and faith. These cathedrals weren't just buildings. They were medieval Wikipedia pages etched in limestone, moral compasses pointing heavenward, and spiritual space shuttles launching ordinary souls toward the extraordinary. They encoded humanity's highest aspirations not with ones and zeros, but with light, geometry, and the quiet wisdom of craftsmen who knew their work would outlast empires. Think about the ripple effect of a single cathedral. Chartres didn't just house relics, it became the economic engine of its region, drawing pilgrims whose need for food, lodging, and souvenirs birthed entire markets. The stonemasons who carved Rhyme's smiling angel didn't just sculpt a face, they sparked a local tradition of stonework that still defines the region's artistry today. Even the gargoyles, those stone jesters, taught generations to see humor and horror as two sides of the same coin, shaping folklore that trickled into everything from Shakespeare's plays to modern fantasy novels. But the real magic lies in how these structures democratized the divine. In an era when literacy was rare and power was hoarded, cathedrals offered a sacred script anyone could read. A farmer might not understand Latin Mass, but he could trace the labors of the months carved into a doorway and see his own life validated as part of God's plan. A child couldn't pass theological treatises, but she could watch sunlight paint Bible stories across the floor and grasp their essence without a single word. These weren't just places of worship, they were the world's first immersive classrooms, teaching through every sense. What's astonishing is how their lessons adapt across centuries. The same rose window that taught medieval believers about cosmic order now inspires astrophysicists studying fractal patterns in nature. The acoustic tricks that made Gregorian chants resonate in Norwich's nave find echoes in modern concert halls. Even the green men, those leafy enigmas, speak to eco-conscious minds today as symbols of humanity's tangled roots with nature. Gothic cathedrals are like palimpsests. Each generation reads them differently, yet their core truths remain. So next time you stand before one, resist the urge to snap a photo and move on. Pause. Let your eyes follow the shadow of a flying buttress as it creeps across the pavement like a sundial. Press your palm against a wall where medieval hands once rested and feel the coolness they felt. Look for the mason's mark hidden in the triforium, the graffiti of a long-dead artisan saying, "I was here." These buildings don't just belong to the past, they're in constant dialogue with the present, whispering to those willing to lean in and listen. And if this journey has stirred something in you, if you've ever wondered about the hidden stories coiled in a column's fluting or the secret behind a stained glass hue, don't let it end here. Share your favorite cathedral mystery in the comments, or better yet, go chase it down yourself. There are still codes waiting to be cracked, shadows that align only on certain days, and colors no chemist can fully replicate. The stones have kept their secrets for 800 years. They're ready to reveal them, one curious visitor at a time. Until then, keep looking up and down and sideways, because history's most profound conversations often happen in the spaces